Welcome to your astrological forecast for the week of Monday, October 30th through Sunday, November 5th, 2023. This week we start out the month and we are really still recovering from those aftershocks from the full moon lunar eclipse that happened in Taurus on October 28th. So remember, that was just on Saturday basically, and now we're starting the week 2 days later. And we're still kind of recovering and adapting to those changes, the massive changes that have occurred, not just from that full moon lunar eclipse, but also the eclipse season in general, both eclipses. Because remember, we also had that new moon solar eclipse only a few weeks ago. So a lot has changed. It may feel like the very aspects of physics have changed ever so slightly. It's like the world is different, hence the name of the forecast. It's like, in a way, it is kind of like we're in a different dimension, so to speak. So that is very profound. It affects everyone in a different way. However, generally speaking, like I talked about over those last forecasts, generally speaking, the very nature of our relationships and how we support ourselves, our investments, our commitments, our obligations, all of that has likely changed for you in a very dramatic and profound way over the last few weeks. So I just wanted to highlight that. No, there is technically no event this week that has to do with any of that. Technically speaking, we are done with eclipse season. We've finished those two eclipses. However, I would be remiss if I didn't bring that up, right? Because that was very profound. It just happened. So we're still dealing with that as we start out this week. I did have a few events that I wanted to talk about for this week in particular before we dive into that day by day forecast. So the first major event is Saturn turning direct. If you've been listening to my sign by sign month forecast, you've probably heard this spiel already. But basically, when planets are retrograde, their energies still affect us, but they do so in kind of an indirect way. It's more subtle, more nuanced, more spiritual, more subconscious, right? So as a planet goes out of retrograde and turns direct, like Saturn is doing so now, well, first of all, their energies become intensified because to switch from retrograde to direct doesn't happen immediately. There is kind of a stationary period where the planet appears to be moving hardly at all. It's stationary, right? That's why we call it, in this case, stationary direct. So as planets do that and become they slow down and hardly move at all for a week or more, this intensifies the energy. And remember, Saturn is already an intense energy, right? It's very heavy. It pushes us down, so to speak. It weighs us down, but it forces us to be structured, disciplined, responsible, all that good stuff. So this is going to be very heavy energy. And, Saturn is in Pisces, so this is kind of a weird place to have Saturn. It is pushing us to be more responsible, more disciplined and all that. But it's more having to do with spirituality, emotional health, things of that nature. So, let's be realistic. Let's be grounded with our spirituality and intuition and emotional health, all that good stuff, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's one part of Saturn turning direct. The other one is kind of going back to what I was saying earlier. So when planets turn direct, yes, they go through that stationary kind of intensified period, but also, you have to take into account that planet is no longer retrograde, so its energies will affect us in a more literal way moving forward. So rather than affecting us in this weird kind of dreamy subconscious way, the effects become more literal. So in the case of Saturn turning direct, that basically means more obvious Saturn energy. Saturn is behaving a little bit more normally. It's what we'd expect from Saturn. So yes, more structure, more discipline. Saturn energy can make you feel heavy, depressed, bored. But again, that silver lining is that you can use that Saturn energy to become better, to become wiser. As long as you're being responsible and grounded and taking ownership of yourself, Saturn will actually reward you. It's not always bad. It's definitely a tough love planet, but it's not always bad. Okay, so that's one thing that's going on this week. The other is a third quarter moon that will happen at 12 degrees Leo. And so in a way, depending on how you look at it, you could say that we're done with eclipse season because there are no more eclipses anymore. However, just like I always say, it's the entire lunar cycle that is amplified during eclipse season, right? So this third quarter moon means that we're only 3/4 of the way through the lunar cycle. We just had that full moon lunar eclipse last week. Now we've got the third quarter moon. So basically what I'm getting at is this third quarter moon will be more intense than a typical third quarter moon. Actually, remember, I don't know if you remember that first quarter moon that happened in Aquarius a couple weeks ago, but I really understated in my forecast just how intense that would be. That was a very crazy day. So honestly, I would expect something a little bit similar. Third quarter moons are not quite as intense as first quarter moons, but then again, it kind of depends on how you look at it. Third quarter moons do result in a lot of physical activity, tension. It's definitely a time for change. If you wanted to start something new, it could be a good time around the third quarter moon. However, on the other hand, third quarter moons, it's 3/4 of the way through the cycle. It marks the kind of the beginning of the end of the lunar cycle. It's the start of the last quarter, if that makes sense. So it basically, third quarter moons do result in a lot of need for change and activity, but much of that change and activity has to do with it's psychological. It's in our minds. It's subconscious. It's intuitive, if that makes sense. This marks the beginning of the end where the whole lunar cycle becomes a little bit more dreamy, and the focus starts to shift to the non-physical. It's in our minds. It's in our hearts rather than completely out in the open. So hopefully that makes sense. So with the third quarter moon, you kind of get it all. It's a crisis in consciousness. It does result in that physical activity, literal activity, but also much of it is in our minds. It's existential, right? So yeah, I don't want to drone on too long about that, but that is definitely something to look out for. It's definitely going to be a crazy day. Okay, and then that's pretty much it. In other news, I guess you could say, the moon will be transiting from Taurus through Leo. And I always say this is a beautiful place to have the moon. So on the one hand, yes, the lunar cycle is intensified. We're really going to feel those, I'm picturing like rocky road energy, like bumps on our road. Like we're going to feel every bump on the road, so to speak, from the moon anyway, because of that, eclipse season that's still kind of wrapping up, if that makes sense. So in other words, every sign that the moon goes through, every aspect that the moon makes to the sun, we're going to feel in a more visceral way than we perhaps typically would. So on the one hand, the lunar cycle is still intensified, like I always say, but on the other hand, this is kind of the best place to have the moon. I always say that, right? Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo. Moon really does well in all these signs. It's exalted in Taurus, joy in Gemini, domicile in Cancer, and it does pretty well in Leo too. So yes, things will be intense, but at least we have the moon in some of these kind of homey signs for it, if that makes sense. Okay, and before we get into the day-by-day forecast, I did want to say, if you want a reading, by now you've heard me say this over the last few weeks, but yeah, I'm still open and available for any kind of readings that you would like. I don't just offer birth chart readings. That is kind of my specialty. That's what most people get. But I also do astrocartography readings, and what else do I do? Solar returns are kind of fun and quick and easy. And then there are synastry readings, in other words, like couples readings. I actually don't advertise those. I guess I kind of am now, technically. I kind of do those upon requests, but yeah, if you're interested in any of that, if you want more information, check out my website. It will be up here, and yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's what helps support the channel. So I really appreciate all of that support. And if you don't want a reading, any kind of if you want to like the video or subscribe, I really appreciate all of that as well. We just hit 3,000 subscribers, so that's pretty exciting. Okay, but that's enough of all that nonsense. Let's get into the day-by-day forecast now. So we start out Monday, October 30th, and we've got those Halloween vibes, right? Those really classic Sun and Scorpio vibes. Things are feeling kind of creepy and weird. It's a fun time. Okay, so we start out Monday, October 30th with Sun and Scorpio, of course, just like always at this time of year. But not only Sun is in Scorpio, we still have Sun, Mercury, and Mars all in Scorpio. So a lot of Scorpio energy, right? A lot of that intensity, heavy emotion. Part of the intensity is also because of what I talked about, how we're still kind of wrapping up eclipse season. So lots of intensity, right? We're still very much going through it all. We're adjusting to these changes. We're reacting to these changes. And it's almost like a I'm almost picturing like if you, let's say you're like stabbed or something, right? Or, I mean, that might be kind of graphic, but let's say you have any kind of like physical wound. I mean, first of all, it may take you a moment just to react. Like if you have some adrenaline, you're not even going to feel that, for a certain amount of minutes or maybe even hours, right? And then even once you feel it and realize what's happening, then you start this whole process of, okay, how do I treat the wound? Do I need bandages? And then you go through that healing process, right? So in a way, I know that's kind of a graphic way of looking at it, but that's kind of what we're going through with the intensity from not only Scorpio season, but also from those, especially from those eclipses we just had as well. So, again, yes, they just happened, but we have to go through this whole process of, okay, how do I react to this? How do I adjust to these changes? What do I do going forward? And then of course there's that like healing process, or in other words, integrating, processing everything, so that's very much what we're going through now. And in a way, we're still very much in the early stages of this. We're still in the process of just, our adrenaline's still high. We're still realizing what's happening and deciding how to react to these changes. So go easy on yourself. Do the best you can, take ownership of yourself. That's all we can do, right? And, like Nadia Shaw says, she says, do your best and forget the rest. I haven't listened to her in many years, but that kind of stuck with me. That's a good saying. So anyway, that is kind of the energy that we start out Monday with. And we actually start Monday morning with Moon still in Taurus. That is typically it is a really nice place to have the Moon, right? Moon is exalted in Taurus. However, we just had that full moon lunar eclipse in Taurus only 2 days ago on the 28th. So in other words, as we start out Monday, we're still very, very much in the midst of the full moon lunar eclipse. Yes, it technically happened 2 days ago, but we are still experiencing it with Moon still in Taurus, basically. It's still, these changes are still very much occurring, okay? And then you can see just before noon Eastern Standard Time, Moon does leave Taurus and enter Gemini. I think this is a huge breath of fresh air. Typically, Moon in Taurus would be like the prime real estate. Having Moon exalted, that would be the easiest, most fun place to have the Moon. But in this case, again, having Moon in Taurus opposing Sun in Scorpio and being an eclipse and everything, it was just so intense. There were so many changes. Part of that too was the Moon crossing over Jupiter and Uranus, which just amplified everything. So what would typically be a very grounded place to have the Moon in this case was not so much grounded, very intense. So that's where I say, Moon leaving Taurus and entering Gemini, it gives us a little bit of space from all of that intensity, just a tiny bit. We're still reacting to that. We're still going through that healing process that I described, but we are, moving to the next step, basically, with Moon in Gemini. And I really like this as well because Moon in Gemini brings some much needed detachment, a breath of fresh air. I think it can actually be advantageous to detach, just the right amount, if that makes sense, as we are going through these changes. Of course, we still want to feel things. I'm not saying to be in denial, but I think just that little bit of detachment can be good. This is actually part of why Moon is in Gemini. It's a fun transit. It's a fun placement to have, because we can still have that attention to detail and intuition that the Moon likes to have, but with a certain amount of detachment. We don't have to experience such heavy emotion all the time like the Moon would in a different sign. And I think this really balances the chart as well. We don't have a whole lot of air placements. Actually, I don't think there are any air planets. So with Moon entering Gemini now, it's a breath of fresh air. It brings, that little bit of detachment, and it basically says like, okay, we can laugh this off. We don't have to be so serious about everything. Gemini really doesn't take much seriously. It really doesn't. And I also think this is nice. It complements Scorpio. Scorpio, that's kind of the main focus still. Sun, Mercury, and Mars there. It's such heavy emotion, such serious energy. So bringing in that Moon in Gemini, we still have that serious, heavy emotion, and that is useful as well. There's a lot of intuition and just general awareness that comes from all that. But with Moon in Gemini, it balances the chart a little bit. It makes it a little bit less heavy, a little bit less intense. So I think that's a godsend, to be totally honest. One aspect I did want to mention for Monday, so especially because this happens right around noon Eastern Standard Time, as soon as the Moon enters Gemini, it squares Saturn. Saturn is still at 0 degrees Pisces, so when any planet or body enters any sign, it makes some kind of aspect to Saturn, basically. So that's kind of interesting. I find that interesting. So in this case, Moon entering Gemini. As soon as it enters Gemini, it pretty much immediately makes that first quarter square to Saturn. So in other words, how do I put this? It's like we just can't catch a break. It's like, on the one hand, yes, everything I said is true. We do get a little bit more detached or more kind of playful with Moon entering Gemini. But at the same time, there's this heaviness that comes from that square. There's that heavy, restricting energy that's forcing us to be very realistic and responsible and, wise and mature. Okay, so we kind of just have to go through that before we can truly enjoy those like kind of detached, more playful antics of Moon in Gemini. Okay, I always say lunar aspects they tend to be very brief. I especially this one I think will be very brief. It will take up much of the day in a way, like the late morning and early afternoon. But even by evening on Monday, this will be dissipating, and I think what you'll find Monday evening, Monday night, is that things will become much less intense. And I say that very carefully. Things will, everything is relative. Things will still be generally very intense, but things will be less intense than they have been, if that makes sense. So still more intense than normal or average, but less intense than they have been, definitely over the last few days, maybe even over the last few weeks, if that makes sense. Okay, moving forward to Tuesday, October 31st, Moon now continues through Gemini, and this is what I was talking about. So now we don't have the Moon in that close square to Saturn anymore, and now we can more enjoy that energy from Gemini. I'm sure, we all have each our own relationship to Gemini, specifically Moon in Gemini. This may be an easy or difficult transit for you, but I'm still kind of saying that it's easy and fun objectively or communally because of its relation to the rest of the chart. It brings in a much different energy. It's, Gemini is light, it's detached, it's playful. I think that's exactly the energy we need right now. We all just did a lot of work, we really did. I think now is kind of the time to pat yourself on the back. It's time to kind of lighten the mood a little bit and kind of clear the air, so to speak. So what better energy to have other than Moon in Gemini? Also, Moon in Gemini kind of pushes us to be very adaptable and flexible and kind of embrace change. And that is very key right now as well. So honestly, again, I think this energy is a godsend right now. Moon in joy, Moon in this kind of happy-go-lucky sign and kind of detached sign. I think that's very valuable right now. And again, like I said earlier, we still have that intensity and heavy emotion from those 3 planets in Scorpio, but it's a mix now. We also have detachment. So again, like I said, it's still intense. It's just less intense than it has been, if that makes sense. Okay, one aspect for the 31st. I'm going to try really hard not to cough in this whole forecast because I still have lingering COVID symptoms. But okay, so one aspect for Tuesday, that would be Venus trining Uranus. Venus at 21 degrees Virgo, making that waxing trine, if you want to call it that, to Uranus at 21 degrees Taurus. This one's kind of interesting. So neither of these planets is particularly happy right now. Both are kind of exiled, so to speak. Uranus is in its fall position. There we go. This is the worst cough because it's very unpredictable and uncontrollable. I hate it. But anyway, Uranus at 21 degrees Taurus, Venus at 21 degrees Virgo. Okay, both of these are in their fall signs, right? Venus would be so much more at home in the opposite sign of Pisces, and same with Uranus. Uranus would be much more comfortable in Scorpio. So both are kind of estranged right now. Both are not really acting like their normal selves. They are in these like foreign lands that they're not really accustomed to. But at least they have this trine. So it's almost like 2 friends that are both going through a hard time, going through a rough time, but they, it's like, what do they say? Misery loves company, right? It's like they're having this really nice connection and agreeing and, having this really direct conversation where they can kind of relate and, but they're both coming from like kind of estranged positions. So that's generally the energy. Venus is, of course, the abundance, the desire, the pleasure, and Uranus makes everything unpredictable. It's, shifts in consciousness. It's earthquake energy, right? So combining both of these through this trine, I think that would represent the desire or the pleasure, which has already been in kind of an estranged place, right? So how do I put this? So our desires and our pleasures, what we find valuable, what we value, all of that has been unusual. We're more valuing things that are outside of the box with Venus in Virgo, okay? And I think this is strengthened by all the Scorpio placements as well. So now as Venus trines Uranus, it's channeling in that Uranian energy, and that is making the desire and the pleasure even more unpredictable, and even more so we're desiring things that are outside the box. We may enjoy things that are weird or unusual or counterculture. We may enjoy things that we wouldn't typically enjoy, things that are kind of out of our character for us, if that makes sense. So on the one hand, just like with most Uranus aspects, this can be unsettling because this can indicate change to what we value, and of course, that can be unsettling for us, especially with our relationships and things like that. We depend on what we value to make life enjoyable and worth living. So if that is now suddenly changing, that can be distressing. That can be uncomfortable. It's another aspect that requires adjustment, right? However, this may be what's necessary to push you to finding a deeper pleasure, a more true pleasure, something that is more right for you. Maybe we're enjoying something, maybe we're looking at something that we wouldn't usually look at that may be actually better for us. Maybe we're moving on to the new, the new layer, a new dimension, so to speak. I'm going to say that again. I know that's so cheesy since it's the title, but you get what I'm saying. We're moving on to that next level in terms of our desires and our values, desiring something maybe better for us or more real, more authentic. Really heavy stuff, to be honest. Okay, so moving on to Wednesday, November 1st. Moon continues through Gemini. In the kind of late afternoon Eastern Standard Time, Moon will leave Gemini and enter Cancer. And this is beautiful as well. I know I ranted and raved about Moon in Gemini. We still have that for most of the day. But Moon in Cancer is going to be really beautiful as well because, for one, it's in domicile there, right? Moon is at home in Cancer. We all feel more, which is not a bad thing. It may feel like a bad thing sometimes, but it's not. We may feel more. We're more in touch with our emotions. We know how we feel. So there's kind of this clarity that comes from Moon in Cancer that is really beautiful. But also look to how the Moon will be aspecting the Sun. Cancer, of course, trine Scorpio. So as the Moon enters Cancer, it's nearing that trine to the Sun. It's in that harmonious aspect. And the whole eclipse season, the whole lunar cycle is still intensified because of eclipse season, right? So, like I said, Moon in Cancer, we're going to really feel that. It's going to feel very strong. It's going to feel very comforting to know how we feel. At least we have that clarity, right? We may still feel things that are difficult. We may still be in difficult situations, but at least we know where we're at, right? So that's huge. But also, again, that Moon closing in on that trine to the Sun, that's going to be really refreshing. It's going to push us to be feeling very strong, very creative as well. This is a water trine. So really heavy emotion, deep emotion, but generally more toward the positive side. Sun trining the Moon, or Moon trining the Sun, if you want to be technical. It pushes us all to be in a kind of a collective good mood, generally speaking. So a lot of emotion, a lot of heavy emotion, but generally positive. Really great for intuition and creativity. Okay, and remember what I said is any time any planet enters a sign, it makes an aspect to Saturn, right? But this is interesting because as soon as the Moon enters Cancer, it actually trines Saturn. So yes, we're channeling in that heavy energy, but we're doing so through a trine, which is a harmonious, easy aspect. So in other words, this is excuse me, this is kind of like a what do they call it in baseball? Like a soft pitch, like it's an easy throw. I'm really bad with my sports analogies, so I don't know why I went there, but this is an easy one. It's like yes, it's showing us some kind of challenge or increased responsibility, but in a kind of light and easy way, if that makes sense. Specifically, with all this water energy, it makes everyone more emotional. You feel everything more viscerally. And oftentimes, it can feel like an ending. Water signs tend to correlate with endings, so it's very weird energy, to be honest, and it pushes everyone to be more kind of sincere, because in the ending phase you've got nothing to lose, so why not? There's this kind of like rawness that comes from it, if that makes sense. On the other hand, though, there are those Scorpio placements, so we're wanting to like conceal ourselves, and like there's this rigidity there. But at the same time, there's also this kind of like, we've got nothing to lose, like the world already ended, so let's just throw it all out there. And then specifically with this trine to Saturn, it's pushing us to get real with our spirituality, but in kind of a soft way, to be honest. Keep in mind though, Saturn is stationary right now. It's preparing to turn direct, so it's not really moving. So it is intense, it's heavy, but again, it's a trine aspect, so it softens the blow. Let's just put it that way. All right, Thursday, November 2nd. This is where we actually get that exact trine from the moon to the sun, and this is really beautiful. You can see it happens pretty much right at noon Eastern Standard Time. Technically, I think it'd be like a few minutes after noon Eastern Standard Time. So basically, like for most of the day, you're gonna feel that exact trine between the moon and the sun. The moon's gonna be very close to that trine all day, basically. So again, I always say this puts us in our best shot at being in a collective good mood. It is heavy energy. It's Scorpio. It's Cancer. It's very heavy. It's very emotional. We're all so sensitive right now. We're so aware. I think part of that is because we're all slightly traumatized from the last few weeks of the eclipse season. But yeah, we're all, our senses are just like flaring up. We are so intuitive. We're so sensitive right now. We're so aware. But this is good. I mean, yes, that can be kind of scary, right? We're all kind of maybe freaked out right now. But channeling in all that heavy water energy, again, like at least we know how we feel at this point of this journey, right? And water energy, I do think may be useful to adjusting to all these changes as well, because water is fluid, right? Water is constantly changing. Even if you let water just sit out in a stagnant pool, it will eventually evaporate, right? I mean, if it's dry enough, whatever. I mean, it depends on water's constantly changing. The very shape of it completely depends on what it's around, right? So with this heavy abundance of water energy, this is actually the most watery chart I've seen in a while. So that basically indicates we are all a little bit more like those water signs that we're all familiar with. We're a little bit more fluid or a little bit more adaptable. So I think this is really crucial for adapting to these changes. And then also, again, that point I made about that increased intuition, that is crucial as well for not only like integrating to the changes that have already occurred, but also knowing where to go into the future. That intuition is going to be really key. Okay. So yeah, honestly, really, really beautiful chart today. I'm glad we actually have like multiple beautiful charts this week. So I am very appreciative of that. I think, this is much needed and honestly much deserved at this point. We've worked very hard. So let's have, I don't even want to call it a break necessarily, because we're still working through a lot, but at least things get a little easier. The leash gets a little looser, longer, whatever. Okay, Friday, November 3rd, moon continues through Cancer. I'm still going to rant and rave about this. So moon is still in domicile. It's still, it's not trining the sun anymore, but it's still loosely trining the sun. It's at least trining by sign. So again, honestly, Friday is a lot like Thursday. You've got that heavy water energy, Scorpio, Cancer. Those are the main focus points, I would say. So again, heavy energy, but positive. We're adapting to those changes. We've got that increased intuition and creativity. Beautiful stuff. 2 aspects for today. We've got Sun opposing Jupiter and Venus opposing Neptune. Which one should we talk about first? Let's talk about Sun opposing Jupiter. So Sun at 10 degrees Scorpio opposes Jupiter at 10 degrees Taurus. Remember, I'm sure you know this because you clearly know about astrology. Jupiter expands everything, right? Jupiter kind of blows up whatever it touches. That's usually good. That's usually, it brings about abundance, but it can also just expand things that may not always necessarily be what we want, right? So in this case, Jupiter's energy is channeling through the sun. in Scorpio. So what I find is when you have oppositions between Scorpio and Taurus in general, there's this energy of like discovery, because Scorpio, specifically Sun in Scorpio, it's like shining a flashlight. It's in the dark, so to speak, but but it has this great focus. It has this super bright flashlight that it's honing in and focusing on wherever it's looking, and gaining such incredible perception. It's lighting up the dark, and it's becoming aware in an area that has not had awareness before, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what we're all experiencing in our own way. As always, you can look to where this falls in your chart to see how it affects you personally, but generally speaking, that's what we're experiencing. So this in itself, it sounds really great, but anything involving increased awareness can be discomforting, right? Because you might not like what you see. You don't know what you're going to see when you shine the flashlight. But you got to do that. You got to shine that flashlight. I'm going to really go hard with this analogy, I guess. But you got to do that in order to see what's around you, become aware, and, have that greater understanding. And then it becomes really powerful when you apply your free will, because then now you have greater information. You have greater consciousness. You have more power and more responsibility. And, now you can do more. So that's where, you have that opportunity. So really powerful stuff. Jupiter in particular, again, it brings abundance. It brings a little bit of like sunshine, so to speak. I know it's kind of weird to say since I'm talking about Jupiter, but it is kind of sunshiny energy, to be honest. It's sparkly, glittery energy. That's how Jupiter appears. So it's bringing in that little bit of optimism and hope to what is otherwise kind of a dark place. How do I put this? So in other words, it's like we're still in a dark place. We're feeling good. We're feeling strong. We're like gaining awareness. We're adapting to these changes, but we're still in kind of a dark place. So as we get this opposition to Jupiter, it channels in some much needed abundant energy. Let's be a little cheerful. Let's be optimistic. It's not so bad. Let's look at the glass half full type of thing. So I think that's, much needed. Any kind of Jupiter energy is really great. Okay, the other opposition is Venus opposing Neptune. This one's a little weirder. So channeling in that Neptune energy, I'm picturing it like a rope. Channeling in that Neptune energy through Venus. That basically means that, Neptune energy is weird. It's psychic. It's intuitive. It's creative, right? It has no bounds. It has no structure. It's very creative, very spiritual, very artistic. So we're channeling it in that through Venus, which has everything to do with our desires and pleasures. So in other words, our desires and pleasures may become more spiritual in nature. They may be more fluid. They may lack structure, which maybe is a downside. But on the plus side, they may be deeper in nature, more spiritual, more emotional. Again, Venus is still in fall in Virgo, so that points to us really, we're wanting something really unique. We're wanting something different. We're wanting something outside of the box. So yeah, I think, just be aware that whatever you are seeking may come to you in a way that you may not be expecting. So don't think that exactly what you want looks like. Let me rephrase that. Like, whatever you want, don't be so sure that you know what it looks like, because it may come to you in a different form. And I think it's very important for us to be open to what we want coming to us in a different way than what's expected. Does that make sense? Especially with this type of aspect. So just be open-minded, and you may find some kind of unusual or unexpected pleasure. But it may be very deep in nature. So kind of interesting. Okay, Saturday, November 4th. This is actually the day where Saturn turns direct. So finally, this is so beautiful. It honestly kind of like freaked me out having Saturn retrograde at the first degree of Pisces. It was so close to entering Aquarius. It was so close. It was literally half a degree away from entering Aquarius. And I don't want that. I don't want to go back to these last couple of years where we had Saturn in Aquarius. I don't think any of us do. Not to rag on Saturn and Aquarius, but let's go forward, right? Let's move forward. That's what I want. So anyway, so that's what we're doing now with Saturn turning direct. I pretty much said what I had to say about this placement in the intro. Basically just to recap really quick, it has to do with Saturn's Saturn's energy coming back online, affecting us in a more visceral, direct way, right? Saturn is direct. Saturn is direct. It's literal. It's in your face. And Saturn's very heavy. It's pushing us to become disciplined, responsible, more stoic, specifically in the Pisces realm. So with your subconscious, with your intuition, that creativity, spirituality, all of these areas are typically not super disciplined, right? That's where it's kind of a catch-22. It's kind of contradictory. This is not typically an area where we do have some kind of discipline. However, to truly excel spiritually, you need to be so grounded, right? You need to be so in touch with your physical realm. You can't transcend and experience like nirvana or whatever it is if you haven't mastered the physical realm. Or in other words, you can't veer off into fourth, fifth, sixth dimension or whatever if you haven't mastered the third dimension. I think that's where many people don't realize that, and they don't realize how there's a lot of pseudo spirituality where people are maybe actually in it for attention or money or something else or gratification, and they actually it's so many people use spirituality as an escape, and that's not truly how it works, if that makes sense. You can't ascend if you haven't even learned how to support yourself and survive in this 3D world. And that's the challenge, because we have so much to learn from basic 3D reality. It's a hard place, right? So anyway, I don't want to drone on about that too much, but I think these are some themes that are coming up with Saturn turning direct in Pisces. Be real with yourself. Are you taking care of yourself emotionally, spiritually? Are you being grounded? Do your beliefs work for you, etc.? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves with Saturn turning direct in Pisces moving forward after November 4th, okay? Two more things to talk about. So very early in the day, Eastern Standard Time, moon will leave moon will leave Cancer and enter Leo. So we no longer have that trine aspect. That's too bad. Now we are getting close to this third quarter moon aspect. So things are revving up a little bit. This isn't going to be as intense as the eclipse. Of course, this isn't an eclipse, right? That's kind of obvious. However, things are revving up, though. They are becoming more intense than the last few days, I would say. This is true not only because the moon is stepping into a square with the sun, but also because the moon is entering Leo. Leo is a really rambunctious sign. It's very energetic, right? It's very outgoing. It's very fun. It's a playful energy. I would say it's one of the easier signs to experience, if I'm being totally honest. However, again, think about the aspect that Leo makes to Scorpio, because that's what it's all about. The moon literally would have no light if it weren't for the sun. So it's so much of what the moon represents has to do with the sun, if that makes sense. So in this case, yes, moon is moving into this square with the sun. So this, squares are anxious. They're restless. They make us a little irritable, a little stressed. But basically all it is, it's pushing us to make change. You would never, if you were always happy and content, and if you were just trines all the time, there would never be any change. There would never be any improvement or growth. And so what would be the point of it all, right? So I know that may not be what you want to hear right now. I know we just went through a lot. We just had that really, I was going to say intense workout. That's not even what it was. We had an intense competition, or the race or whatever it was, right? So now at this point, you don't want to get up and practice. We want to still rest, but we've got a little more to go. I know we can do this because we just went through so much more, if that makes sense. So, everything's relative. This is going to be definitely a lot more intense than a normal day, but less intense than what we've experienced over the last several weeks. Okay. Yes. And I want to highlight one more time. It's pushing us to make change. Third quarter moon is definitely, it's more geared toward change, having to do with adjustments, so it's not usually launching something entirely new. That would be more for the first quarter moon. Third quarter moon is more about, what kind of changes or tweaks or edits do I need to make before this cycle kind of comes to a close. It's that last opportunity to make those changes. So for example, like, I don't know, making some kind of lifestyle change, or again, third quarter moons have a lot to do with spirituality. I know the third quarter moon isn't quite yet on Saturday, but we're moving into that type of energy. So that's why I'm talking about it. So yeah, it does have a lot more to do with, the subconscious, psychology, spirituality, things like that. It's existential in nature. So is there room for improvement? Are there changes you can make in those types of areas? Can you change your mindset in some kind of way? Can you change your beliefs? That's what this third quarter moon would be really great for. Even Saturday would be a great time to make those changes, since the moon is already in Leo and it is pretty close to that trine square with the sun. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Saturday, I didn't mention Mercury opposing Uranus. So that's kind of interesting, because in a way it kind of echoes what I just said. Mercury opposing Uranus is really great for learning new things, coming across information in kind of a random, unexpected way, information that may really change your beliefs, your philosophy, your worldview in a really powerful way. This is sudden breakthroughs. This is epiphany. This is maybe an intuitive realization, but again, much of it could also be informational as well. Mercury is in Scorpio, so this will come through information. This will come from intuition. It may come from emotion as well. This is still emotional territory. Maybe a combination of all those. So yeah, the combination of Mercury opposing Uranus with, entering almost third quarter moon territory, there's some kind of mental or philosophical shift that it may behoove us to make at this point. Let me phrase it that way. I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm just suggesting there's some kind of mental or maybe emotional kind of shift that we may be interested in making at this time. Yeah, and again, it may be something. You may come across information that you were not necessarily looking for. Some kind of realization, some kind of awareness that, you weren't like Googling things. You weren't pondering really. You weren't doing the work to try to figure something out. But this is the energy where it just kind of comes to you, whether you like it or not. It's some kind of awareness, some kind of idea or perception that just comes to you out of nowhere. So again, like I always say, that is distressing because you may not want that responsibility that comes from that increased awareness, but like it or not, that's what you basically have moving forward. So that's where the opportunity comes to expand your consciousness and to make maybe wiser decisions with that consciousness. Lastly, for Sunday, November 5th, moon is now like fully in Leo. It's transiting through Leo. Very early in the day, Eastern Standard Time, we get that exact third quarter moon. But, that honestly doesn't so much matter. Like, the third quarter moon is going to affect us all day. It affected us even, last night, yesterday evening, and really all day Sunday, we're going to be feeling it. We're going to feel that increased activity, energy, restlessness, maybe stress or anxiety, but this doesn't have to be stressful or anxious if you utilize the energy, make some kind of change your perception, change your awareness, change your lifestyle in some kind of way. And I always say for third quarter moons, if you truly have no change you want to make, if you're hearing me and going, well, and I would say give it time. Wait until this is actually upon you on the weekend of November 4th and 5th. And if at that time you still say, no, I don't need to make any kind of change, my life is fine. I would challenge you on that. Is there really no like mental or spiritual change that may benefit you to make? But hey, if there's truly no change that you have any desire to make, do something. Do something energetic. Go on a run, work out. Make some kind of improvement in your house or in your apartment or whatever. Do something. Do something to release some kind of energy. If you have a favorite sport or pastime, even something as simple as like video games or something. Well, I don't know if that would count though, because you're kind of like sitting still for that. I want you to do something active. That's really what the third quarter moon wants you to do, not me. Because if you're just resting and like sitting around all day, the third quarter moon is you're gonna be stressed. You're gonna be irritable. You gotta get that energy moving. That I've been learning a lot about feng shui lately. Anyway, so that's kind of the energy for today. Make some kind of change your perception, change your awareness, adapt to these changes, roll with the punches. This is gonna be a bit intense because Sun in Scorpio, Moon in Leo. These are both fiery placements. I know Sun in Scorpio is a water sign, but Scorpio is fiery though, right? Like, can we all agree on that? Especially because Sun is pretty close to Mars as well. So this is Mars energy. It's fire energy, or at least fiery. Again, technically Sun in Scorpio is water, but it's fiery. It's passionate. It's raw. We're clashing two fixed signs. They're both very strong-willed. They're stubborn, but they're clashing together. Moon is in Leo, which is ruled by the Sun. So I don't know. It's a mess. We are mixing fire with water, so it's steamy, it's passionate, it's intense, right? So make some kind of change, make some kind of improvement, and I don't know, enjoy it. I always say that, and I'm not saying that to be facetious. I really mean that. Yes, there may be some chaos here, but I almost want to go back to like Moon and Gemini. Like, can we learn in like what sign is more adaptable than Gemini, right? Or maybe Pisces. I would say look to these signs. Look to, we're experiencing so much change right now. So what do the signs do that are the best at handling change? I would say Gemini and Pisces. They have no structure. They are so fluid, right? So I'm not saying to abandon your structure. I'm just saying to, be like a tree. We got to sway in the wind. We got to embrace these changes and allow it, because these changes are bigger than us. We will not win a fight against the change. So that's all I have to say for this week. I really hope this was helpful for you. I know I look like shit right now and I'm still recovering, so I appreciate you even watching this at all. But yeah, I really hope this information is helpful to you. Next week we do have two inner planets changing signs. Venus entering Libra. Finally, Venus has been way back there. I'm like, come on, girl, like catch up. So yeah, Venus, she finally enters Libra, and Mercury will leave Scorpio and enter Sagittarius. And of course it depends on your astrology, but I'm kind of excited for that, because one by one this month we'll have Mercury, then I think the Sun, and then Mars all enter Sagittarius. And Sagittarius is just so much more optimistic energy compared to Scorpio. And again, there's different pros and cons to each sign. I love Scorpio transits. I love that time of year. But Sagittarius is just so fun, right? It's so jovial. It's like holiday energy. So I think that's something to be excited for. So I look forward to talking to you about all that next week. Otherwise, have a great week. Embrace these changes. Enjoy the process if you can. And I'll see you next week.